What if I told you that the US and Iran were on a collision course for a catastrophic war, one that could engulf the entire region in chaos, devastate the global economy, and alter world history forever? And what if I told you that at the heart of it all was one tiny genocidal apartheid state? Now, some will call this anti-Semitic, but that's just a cheap deflection, an attempt to silence discussion and distract us from the facts right in front of our faces. In 2012, historian and author Mark Perry published a bombshell expose in Foreign Policy magazine, revealing leaked CIA memos from the end of the Bush administration. These documents exposed a covert Israeli operation so reckless, so dangerous, that it risked dragging the US into an all-out war with Iran.
CIA memos describe how Mossad agents posed as US intelligence agents to make contact with a Pakistani organization known as Jindullah to launch attacks on targets within Iran.
This may not sound shocking, but when you look deeper, the implications are disastrous. This wasn't just another covert mission. It was part of a calculated effort to drag the US into a war that would set the Middle East on fire and tank the global economy. And the Israelis don't even give a damn, because you see, Israel is no longer interested in survival. They are interested in their supremacy. By the end of this video, you'll understand how Israel is determined to pull America into a catastrophic war, one that could drag the world into an abyss of destruction, all for Israel's gain. And it all starts with a false flag like the one we're about to uncover. If you're new here, we make video explainers about current events, geopolitics, and propaganda. We also produce podcasts with some of the most intelligent speakers in this space. If you're into this sort of thing, go ahead and like and subscribe. Now, given the nature of our content, we don't receive sponsors, so your support goes a long way. You can also help us with our work by becoming a member on our private website, where you gain exclusive access to documentaries and behind-the-scenes content with our guest speakers. Thank you for your patience and your consideration. Now, let's get back to the subject at hand. In the final days of the Bush administration, a highly sensitive intelligence report began its ascent through the U.S. intelligence chain of command. The report passed through the CIA Directorate of Operations, the National Clandestine Service, and the CIA Counterintelligence Center, before finally reaching CIA Director Michael Hayden. Recognizing its significance, the Director of National Intelligence was briefed on the findings and assessed the implications for U.S. national security. This report finally made its way to the White House, where President Bush was briefed on its contents. According to sources, Bush went absolutely ballistic after the briefing. In short, the CIA memos detailed how Israeli Mossad agents posed as American spies to recruit members of the terrorist organization Jindullah to fight their covert war against Iran. The Mossad agents carried US passports, presented themselves as American operatives, and provided cash, weapons, and intelligence to a foreign designated terror group known as Jindullah to carry out attacks against Iran. Now, for a supposed ally, this is treasonous behavior. But before we continue, let's take a moment to quickly understand who Jindullah is. To do that, we need to learn about the Balochistan insurgency. And to do that, we need to learn about the Baloch people. I know, it's like Inception, but to truly grasp what's going on here, we need to appreciate all the little details. The Baloch people are a distinct ethnic group with their own culture and language. There are about 15 million worldwide. The majority reside in the Balochistan region of Southwest Asia, which spans 3 modern countries: Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Of the 15 million Baloch, 8 million live in Pakistan, 4 million in Iran, and 1 million in Afghanistan. As a minority group in these nations, there are some Baloch who desire independence. And among them, there are those who believe that armed insurgency is the path to independence. The insurgency in Balochistan, therefore, is an ongoing revolt by Baloch separatists and various Islamist militant groups against the governments of Pakistan and Iran. Jindullah was one such group. They were a relatively small group with only a few thousand fighters, made up primarily of anti-Shia Salafi jihadists. In 2010, the US State Department designated Jundullah as a foreign terrorist organization due to its numerous attacks on Irani civilians. According to the State Department, Jundullah uses a variety of terrorist tactics including suicide bombings, ambushes, kidnappings, and targeted assassinations. Notably, in October 2009, a Jundullah bombing killed more than 40 people and was the deadliest terrorist attack in Iran at the time since the 1980s. All of these attacks were significant, but the October 2009 suicide bombing was especially dangerous for US-Irani relations. Not only did it kill civilians, but it also claimed the lives of 5 high-ranking officers from Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. At the time, Iran was furious, blaming the United States, Britain, and Pakistan for supporting the group. While all 3 denied the allegations, Iran insisted that Jundullah had foreign backing. But what Iran didn't know was that the foreign backers of Jundullah were actually Israeli. This information came from the former leader of Jundullah, Abdul Malik Rigi, who was captured by Iran shortly after the October 2009 attacks. In an interview aired by Irani Press TV, Rigi explained that Jundullah had met with a mysterious group in Casablanca who claimed to represent NATO. Rigi said that the group's true identity became suspicious to him as he reflected on the nature of their meetings. For example, he wondered why they hadn't just met in Afghanistan, where NATO already had a base and a much more secure line of communication with Jundullah. The other issue was the nature of the targets of the group suggested. They insisted that we transfer our operations from the eastern border region to the capital. We thought this was very strange. After thinking about it, we concluded that they were either Americans acting under NATO cover or Israelis. According to Rigi, the agents provided a list of names, addresses, and photos of people to assassinate in Tehran, along with equipment and explosives for these operations. They also promised very high sums of money for the overall project, as well as specific amounts for each assassination. When the interview first aired, many dismissed Rigi's claims, suggesting that he was merely under duress. However, the leaked CIA memos from the Bush era that Mark Perry reported on in 2012 confirmed that Mossad agents were actually impersonating CIA operatives and meeting with Jundullah. Okay, now let's take a moment to digest this information. Israeli Mossad agents were impersonating American intelligence operatives, meeting with a foreign designated terror organization to arm, fund, and train separatists so they could carry out destabilizing terror attacks on civilian populations and high-ranking officers, risking a potential escalation between either the US and Iran or the US, Pakistan, and Iran. This is treacherous, dangerous, reckless behavior by a supposed ally. Israel was essentially hoping that these false flags would be blamed on either the US or Pakistan or both, which could have instigated a war between them and Iran. Now let's briefly explore how destructive such a war would be. It would obviously devastate the lives of millions of people in Iran, Pakistan, and the Middle East, including the American troops based in the region. This would be catastrophic enough. However, this would also affect the entire planet. Here's how.
To the world economy's most vulnerable choke point, a sea lane through which 1/5 or more of all the oil and natural gas has to pass to reach global markets.
Iran has made clear that in the event of such a war, they would close the Strait of Hormuz, a vital choke point where 20 million barrels of oil travels through on a daily basis. This would cut off 30% of global oil trade. If this oil was delayed, even for just a single day, it would send oil prices soaring. But what if it were delayed for 30 days? If worst came to worst and the Strait of Hormuz was closed for a month or more, then crude would likely spike to $350 a barrel. The world economy would crater. This price per barrel would send gas prices to $11 per gallon and produce long lines at the gas station. And that's if your gas station would even have gas. And it's important to remember, oil and gas isn't just for your car to get from point A to point B. It's how planes fly. Power stations give electricity, crops are extracted, food is produced, goods are moved by land and sea, and the list goes on and on. Everything would become at least 5 times more expensive at a time when people can barely make ends meet. And this is just if oil were to be temporarily delayed. Just imagine if it were delayed for a prolonged period of time. Iran has made clear that a war between them and the US would force them to use their massive supply of suicide drones and ballistic missiles to target and destroy the oil and gas infrastructure of the Arabian Peninsula. Let's think about how catastrophic this would be. In 2019, the Houthis, the Yemeni group supported by Iran, attacked Abqaiq and Khorais oil plants. This one attack, using cheap drones, caused fires that forced the plant to close down for repairs. It took 2 whole days of round-the-clock firefighting to put them out. This small attack cut Saudi's daily oil production in half, amounting to a 5% hit on the global oil supply. And this was from an attack on just 2 oil facilities. There are at least 20 sites that Iran would strike, using far more destructive missiles that would take months, if not years, to repair. This would plummet the global oil supply and wreck the economy, which would produce economic, environmental, and socio-political upheavals. It would be complete chaos. And this is what Israel was trying to instigate when their Mossad agents pretended to be American intelligence officers funding, arming, and training Jundullah to attack Irani civilians and officials in Tehran in a false flag that could be blamed on the US. And to quote an intelligence official from Mark Perry's foreign policy expose in 2012, the Israelis didn't even give a damn, because apparently the Mossad wasn't trying very hard to hide these activities, as they were meeting with Jundullah in London right under the nose of American and British intelligence. Now, why would that be? Well, it might have something to do with the power and weight of the Israel lobby, because even though President Bush went ballistic after this report, he ultimately decided to do nothing to prevent Israel from continuing its covert operations, despite internal calls to take action. One intelligence officer summed up the frustration many felt. A senior administration official vowed to take the gloves off with Israel, according to a US intelligence officer. But the United States did nothing, a result that the officer attributed to political and bureaucratic inertia. Political and bureaucratic inertia is code for Zionist influence in the American political system. The US government's failure to take any decisive action against Israel, despite clear internal frustrations, demonstrates the influence of the Israeli lobby and how US policy often bends to Israel's agenda, even at the expense of American interests. Which raises important questions about the nature of the Israeli-American relationship. Because Israel is often described as America's #1 ally, an entity whose interests are naturally and completely merged with that of America's. But how can it be considered an alliance if you are teaming up with people who routinely undermine your own interests and then use their political inertia to prevent you from even complaining about it? And these aren't just questions that you and I may be asking. These are questions that the American intelligence community has been asking for years. According to Perry, these intelligence officers expressed concerns over the fact that Israel's operations were jeopardizing US relationships with countries like Pakistan. One officer remarked that while the US had cooperated with Israel in intelligence gathering, it was a step too far to be involved in the assassination of Irani officials. No matter what anyone thinks, we are not in the business of assassinating Irani officials or killing Irani civilians. This quote speaks directly to the tension within the US government about Israel undermining the interests of its supposed ally. This operation was seen as dangerous and escalatory, moving the US further away from its stated goals. Another intelligence officer highlighted the ongoing tension within the Bush administration regarding Israel's operations with Jundullah. Israel's relationship with Jundullah continued to roil the Bush administration until the day it left office. Israel's activities jeopardized the administration's fragile relationship with Pakistan, which was coming under intense pressure from Iran to crack down on Jundullah. It also undermined US claims that it would never fight terror with terror, and invited attacks in kind on US personnel. So here we see the broader diplomatic consequences of Israel's actions, how they endangered US interests by further entangling them in covert activities that were deeply unpopular with regional allies like Pakistan, while also undermining the moral high ground the US had tried to maintain in its supposed fight against terrorism. A senior administration official expressed the frustration of those who saw Israel as jeopardizing American interests. It's easy to understand and why Bush was so angry, a former intelligence officer said. After all, it's hard to engage with a foreign government if they're convinced you're killing their people. This line underscores the point that Israel's actions in targeting Irani personnel set off a dangerous chain reaction, leading to increased hostilities and further instability, which ultimately hurt US efforts to maintain relationships in the region. And just take a look at this quote summing up the concerns many felt about the dangers of Israel's approach. Israel regularly proposes conducting covert operations targeting Iranis, but is just as regularly shut down, according to retired and current intelligence officers. They come into the room and spread out their plans, and we just shake our heads, and we say to them, don't even go there. The answer is no. This demonstrates the reluctance within the US military and intelligence community to be drawn into Israel's covert operations, which highlights the diverging interests of both nations when it comes to foreign policy. But just as importantly, it also demonstrates that when the US rejects Israeli plans for escalation, the Israelis will just go behind their back, cosplay as CIA agents, and arrange for these operations anyway. As the foreign policy article outlines, Israel's interests are increasingly at odds with the long-term stability and influence the US seeks to maintain in the region. After the disastrous Iraq and Afghanistan wars, which Israel aggressively lobbied for, the US decided to scale back their use of hard power to avoid further overextension of their military and the US dollar. This was essentially the motivation behind the Obama nuclear deal with Iran.
Today, after 2 years of negotiations, the United States, together with our international partners, has achieved something that decades of animosity has not. A comprehensive long-term deal with Iran that will prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
Obama didn't want the US getting dragged into another war in the Middle East over Iran's nuclear program. And he also didn't want Iran on the edge of attaining a weapon. So he decided to negotiate a deal with Iran that offered sanctions relief in exchange for scaling back their capabilities, with international observers keeping a watchful eye on their nuclear program. This was a win-win for both the US and Iran. There would be no more talk of war or nuclear weapons for the foreseeable future. But this wasn't in Israel's interests. They didn't want Iran strengthening their economy or maintaining their impressive ballistic missile program, which Iran wasn't required to scale back in the nuclear deal.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Obama went head-to-head, in a manner of speaking, on the Iran nuclear deal, Obama defending it in a New York Times interview, Netanyahu slamming it on multiple U.S. news programs.
Not a single centrifuge is destroyed. Not a single nuclear facility is shut down, including the underground facilities that they built illicitly. Thousands of centrifuges will keep spinning, enriching uranium. That's a very bad deal.
Now we need to quickly discuss why Israel's so gung-ho when it comes to instigating a war with Iran. Simply put, for Israel to secure its supremacy in the region, they need Iran to be completely destroyed. It isn't enough for them to have their nuclear program scaled back. They need it wiped entirely, along with their entire ballistic missile program. So Israel either wants war, a CIA overthrow of the Irani government, or a complete capitulation from Iran where they abandon both the nuclear and ballistic missile programs. So Israel lobbied heavily against the deal, attempting to stop President Obama from signing it in the first place, even though it was in America's interests. When Obama refused to accommodate Israel, Netanyahu used the power of the Israel lobby to turn Congress against him, even going so far as to fly to Washington, D.C. to address Congress in person.
Well, this is a bad deal. We're better off without it.
Where he pit Republicans against Democrats in a deal that was supposed to serve all of America's interests. And when that didn't work, they pressured Trump to tear it up instead.
The United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
This put Iran right back into their nuclear posture, a position that buys Israel more time to try and instigate a war between them and the US to their own gain and benefit. The unraveling of the nuclear deal, which Israel is 100% responsible for, demonstrates just how powerful and damaging their influence on US foreign policy is. And fast forward now, years later, Trump is back trying to renegotiate the same exact deal Obama already had 10 years years ago. But this time, Iran isn't interested because tearing up the old deal killed the US's credibility.
Former President Obama says pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal is, quote, a serious mistake. In a statement, Mr. Obama said walking away from the JCPOA turns our back on America's closest allies and an agreement that our country's leading diplomats, scientists, and intelligence professionals negotiated. He continued, the consistent flouting of agreements that our country is a party to risks eroding America's credibility and puts us at odds with the world's major powers.
Iran knows that if they agree today, the Zionists could just tear it up tomorrow. The Ayatollah tweeted out recently, why would we negotiate with America when they cannot honor their own agreements? So with negotiations currently at a standstill, Israel is now in a position to continue their false flag covert operations to try and instigate a catastrophic war. And even if the US officially denies any involvement in these sorts of operations, the lack of a response from Washington would suggest tacit approval, especially when Mossad agents are impersonating American intelligence. This is dangerous for both the US and Iran, as it risks a war that only Israel would truly benefit from. As the saying goes, chaos is a ladder.
Chaos. A gaping pit waiting to swallow us all. Chaos isn't a pit. Chaos is a ladder.
I want to end with this final quote from Mark Perry's Foreign Policy magazine article, which I've linked in the description, to drive the point home. What has become crystal clear is the level of anger among senior intelligence officials about Israel's actions. This was stupid and dangerous. Israel is supposed to be working with us, not against us. If they want to shed blood, it would help a lot if it was their blood and not ours. You know, they're supposed to be a strategic asset. Well, guess what? There are a lot of people now, important people, who just don't think that's true. That was 13 years ago. You have to imagine it's only gotten worse since then. So what do you think? Does Israel have too much influence in America? And if so, what do you think can be done to stop them? Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Also, if you appreciated this video, please like, comment, and subscribe because we are 100% shadow banned by YouTube. Don't forget to check out our YouTube playlist to see our different podcasts and video explainers. And remember, you can support our work by becoming a member on our website. Stay safe and see you in the next one.
Trust nothing. No laws. Free your mind. Everything is propaganda. Everything is propaganda. Everything is propaganda. So why not choose your own?
How can you help fight for the truth? Well, you can start by visiting our website and becoming a paid monthly subscriber so we can continue countering mainstream propaganda on a full-time basis. Whether you engage with our content or buy our products, your support goes a long way. If you have any comments or questions, please comment them below. Take care of yourselves. Follow for more.